Hi, I'm DJ Ware. On this episode of the CyberGizmo, I'm going to try to answer the questions I've been getting from a few of my subscribers about how to harden Linux systems. And I think that's really in the context of Linus, but really this subject is much larger than what Linus covers. I'm going to attempt to do as much on this as you guys want to know. So I'm going to kind of let you guys drive where you want this to go next, because that's what I'm here for. I'm here to help you, and maybe I'll learn something in the process too. I mean, we're all in this together. Stay tuned right after this. Linux systems hardening. This is a huge topic. If you were to go, for example, full bore system hardening, and you hardened off your systems from any possible type of attack, which first of all is probably infeasible, but you're probably looking at an effort of upwards of probably 4 to 6 months, in my experience. And that would be encompassing site hardening, network hardening, facility hardening, server hardening, data hardening. This is a broad and a very complicated subject. But I'm assuming that what you want to do is harden your systems at home, and so that's where I'm going to focus this. I'm not going to. This is not a commercial hardening exercise. This is what we can do at home. Maybe we have a few servers, maybe we have a workstation or two, maybe we have a laptop that we're taking out on the road someplace with us and using to access our systems remotely. So that's what I'm going to concentrate on. If there's something in specific that you want to know about, please let me know in a comment below. I mean, I'm always happy to hear from you guys. I always want to help you in any way that I can, as best that I can. Now, I am not a security engineer. I am a enterprise, a systems, a corporate chief architect. That's what I did. I have some knowledge of system hardening. I have some knowledge of how I harden my systems here, and I am prepared to help you with that. But if you expect me to know and be certified in cybersecurity, wrong guy. There are other people out here on YouTube that are probably better suited to help you with that. So I will put my mark in the sand and say this is as far as I can really go in trying to help you. But what I know is probably more than a lot of the CEP's, CEH covers, simply because, certified ethical hackers. Pen testing, I've done some of that. I've done some CEH stuff, but probably beyond what they teach. Anyway, let's get started and see what we got here. So, scope. I have to make some assumptions when I'm starting. If you're more experienced in this area, feel free to skip to the parts that you're interested in. But I'm assuming that this is the first time you have ever hardened a Linux system. I'm also going to assume that you have some basic working knowledge of Linux and are comfortable with it, particularly with the distribution you are using. I'm assuming that you want to maybe you have some needs and wants that you want to reduce the risk of maybe one or more of these: data exfiltration, unauthorized access, damage from malware, or maybe you're just paranoid. Like me, I'm paranoid. You probably have heard this before, something called paranoid Linux. Is that a thing? Is that real? Well, sort of. There was some talk about some people actually wanting to build paranoid Linux for a while, but it actually came from a book by Cory Doctorow called Little Brother. It is about an attack on San Francisco, a terrorist attack, and it is a book about how a group of people that were concerned about losing their liberties fought to preserve them during martial law. And so that's what we're going to, I'll provide a link to that book if you're interested in reading more about it. But yeah, it was really, it was Paranoid Linux. The description in the book is it fully protects the user encrypted communications and Tor. This was written, I think, in 2013. I'm not sure of the exact date, but it's somewhere in there. But you can check that for yourself. But by default, and it had a continual network that was free of chaff and all this other stuff that was in there. Yeah, so if you're looking for a Paranoid Linux, probably the closest thing you'll find today to that would be Tails or Kodachi or Who's Next. Those would probably be the closest you would find to a Paranoid Linux today. But yeah, Paranoid Linux is not a thing. And it doesn't exist, sadly. It was a good idea, though. So first things first, couple of quotes. So this is important that you understand this. The security is a process. It's not a product. And that's a quote by Bruce Schneier. And I agree. Yeah, it is. First of all, you're never done. And second of all, don't walk away thinking that you're done, because the minute you do, your systems will be penetrated. You're never done. You can't sleep at the switch with this one and just do a few things and go, that's good enough, because the minute you do, this is a arms race, and that's what you really need to understand about it. So if you want to get involved in that, welcome aboard and welcome to the world of the ultra paranoid. So here's some questions that I've heard people ask. Does Linux really need to be secure? Do you need a lock on your front door? Or do you need a lock on your car door? Let me ask you that. If you answer yes to that, then yeah, Linux needs to be secure. There's this kind of a. I'll tell you a story. I've always thought it kind of funny that I remember working around medical records in a hospital that you could just walk into and pick up anybody's file and walk out with it. But the minute they put up a computer system, they secured it, but they didn't bother to lock the open area to just walk in and grab a file off the wall. It's just like, if you're going to do security, you have to think of everything. You can't just think of it in one particular position. And so that was the first thing I said was, this is kind of odd that I can walk in and just grab a medical file, and yet I have to log in and get approval and have a reason to access a medical record online. That makes no sense to me. And so, yeah, the other one is security just marketing hype. Some of it is, yeah, some of it definitely is, but I can assure you that it is a very serious subject. It is not just marketing hype. And whether or not you think Linux needs it or not, I guess that depends on really what you're using your Linux for. So I won't say you got to have it. I won't say you don't have to have it. It's just a question of, do you want to leave your front door unlocked or not? That's the question. One of my favorite Linux quotes, this came from a long time ago. I don't remember where I saw this, but I saved it. Linux was made by foreign terrorists to steal money from true American companies like Microsoft, who invented computing as we know it and are being punished for their success. I don't know. I don't remember where that came from. I really don't. I don't know, but it's probably one of the funniest things I ever remember reading. I know that Linus Torvalds actually responded to that. Yeah, I don't remember what his response was, but it was pretty funny. Maybe you can find that. I'm sure you can find that somewhere. So let's get into it. Let's talk about the first steps. So even if you're doing this for home, you need to think about what it is you're trying to do. If you don't, I always say this, if you don't know where you're going, you're just running around pulling knobs and guessing at what things you should be looking at. So first thing you got to think about is some answers to some questions that I have for you to answer. And those are, what are you trying to protect? Are you trying to protect your computer, or are you trying to protect the data? And if it's the data, what data are you trying to protect? So think about that when you're thinking about how far you want to go with this. Second, what are you trying to protect against? Are you concerned that you might leak confidential data, or that you might have accidental loss of data because maybe a hard drive failed, or maybe you accidentally did a remove on a directory that you didn't mean to that had the data in it you wanted to preserve? Or maybe you're concerned about revenue loss caused by service disruptions. Now, that would be more of a business case. But it's possible in a home situation where you are working from home and you're unable to get online to do your job and therefore unable to work. because you have a loss of service. So is that what you're trying to protect? So think about that. Who are you trying to protect against? One of your users, a fellow employee, maybe yourself. In my case, that would be more common. Or a determined bad actor or a group of determined people that want access to the data that you have. So yeah, and we always talk about risk. I mean, you'll never hear me say, oh, this is exactly what you need to do, because there isn't a right answer. And sometimes the answers that I would think are right, there probably aren't anymore. So yeah, I mean, the things change. I mean, things constantly change. So we talk about risks. So you need to assign, if you do answer all three of those, rate them. Which one of those three, what are the most important, and what order would those be? And then once you have the answers to those questions, you can start thinking about how to create a security policy. And if you're doing this for home, absolutely. It doesn't have to be anything formal, but at least you need to know, maybe I need a firewall at my router that's coming into the network. Maybe I don't want my Wi-Fi on my LAN. Maybe I want my Wi-Fi out somewhere else. Maybe I don't want my IoT devices on the same network that I am doing company work or working from home with. Or maybe I have financial data that from my taxes or my banks or my credit cards that I don't really want anywhere else, that don't want it to get out. So yeah, those are some of the things. So let's take a couple examples. Let's say you have an old PC and it holds some photos, and those photos probably have a very high intrinsic value to you. Because what would happen if you lost them? You certainly couldn't reproduce them, because they're probably time-based. They're probably pictures of your children. There's probably early pictures of you and your spouse or your significant other, and you couldn't go back in time and get those pictures again. So they probably have a very high intrinsic value to you, and their loss would be, if an attacker gained access to that system, that value would be of nothing to them. Other than maybe they would know what you look like when you were 20. So the choice is, how valuable is that data to you, and what's the best way to protect it? Maybe it's just as simple as having a good backup strategy that protects that kind of data from fire or some kind of natural disaster or something like that you don't want to have in your home, but you want to have a copy of it outside on the cloud somewhere that you can easily retrieve in the event that you lost your systems at home. So that's one example of a security policy that you might think about. Another one might be if you just have a computer that you're playing around on and you're using it to learn Linux, or maybe you're using it to get a certification in a particular area of Linux that you're interested in, whether that be in system administration or cybersecurity or whatever it is that you're pursuing, database, whatever. So if you lost that system, or it was compromised in some way, how much of a loss would that be to you? Obviously, if you're taking a course that you're paid for, you probably want to preserve your work in progress. So again, it might stem back to just having a good backup. But as far as an attacker that gained access to your system, what intrinsic value would they get from the information that was on it? Probably not much. So the reason why I'm having you think about this is that a lot of times we mix our security data on the same machine, and that's not always a wise thing to do. Now, you can do that if you mix it on directories where you have different levels of information and protection on those directories, although that's not something you would typically hear people recommend that you do. Because if a system is compromised, usually it's the entire system that's compromised, including secured data that might be on the system. So whether or not you want to take that risk, again, those are factors for you to decide, not me. But so in that case, if it was just something you were playing around with, an attacker probably wouldn't gain much intrinsic value from that. And so it's probably not worth protecting at all. Maybe all you do is monitor it for any kind of changes. Maybe you see something has been modified in a package or in a configuration file that you don't remember doing. And in that case, you would just nuke and pave it and start over, right? So whether or not, how much security you want to wrap around something like that, again, it's up to you. That's a question you have to answer, not me. If it's a computer where you store financial information, such as Bitcoin, bank accounts, credit cards, data, and stock information, any kind of tax information, those would be of intrinsic value to an attacker, and those would be a catastrophic loss to you. Also, you wouldn't want this. You wouldn't want this data to be unprotected. You would want it to be encrypted. So yeah, your first level of defense is encrypt the data. That is sensitive. It might be your social security information. It could be insurance information that has personalized, what we call personal identifiable information. And if it's personally identifiable information, you would definitely want to encrypt it. And you would definitely not want to store it on publicly accessible machines. That is a suggestion. Yeah, you would also want to encrypt that data if it was backed up anywhere. Erasing on this information, if you were to go through and purge off maybe old tax forms that were, beyond the statute of limitations or beyond the time that you need to store it, those would need to be electronically shredded to the point where they weren't recognizable anymore. There are some thoughts in the security world about whether or not shredding is really capable, whether you could if that's really a capable method of securing data, and probably not. Destroying it by a really high heat fire is, but that would probably mean you take your disk drives out to the parking lot and put and heat them at real high heat, and then smash them with a hammer into small pieces. If they're ceramic disks, like on 2.5-inch media, it's real easy to destroy those. You just tap them, and the media will shatter into a million little pieces. So if we have machines like this, we would need different security policies is really the point. And so, yeah, you don't want to mix those policies on same machines if you can. That's really not a good idea to do because your weak link into that chain will be the way that a determined attacker will gain access to the information, even if you said it was sensitive. So better it not be there. Constraints, there's always a cost. If you're doing backups, you're going to have to buy another drive, or you're going to have to purchase an online service to back up your systems too, and there's always a cost to do that. How far are you willing to go to secure the systems that you have, and what if it's systems, fine. If it's data, that's a different question. If you're doing it to learn good security practices, great. I'm not the right teacher for that. There are other people for that. And so, yeah, I'm not standing up and saying, yeah, listen to me, I'm an expert in security. No, I'm not. I'm just somebody who's been around it a long time. I can tell you this with personal experience: the more security you put on a system, the poorer it will perform. That is a fact. That is a fact you have to live with. How much of that can you live with? So yeah, if you're encrypting everything, it's going to take you a while to get it. But here's Grace Mary Hopper always had a way of describing things to just kind of bring it back down to earth. And she said a ship in port is safe, but that's not what ships are good for. Sail out to sea and do new things. Computers are exactly the same thing. A computer off is safe, but that does not what a computer is for. So don't be afraid to use your machine for what you intend to use it for. These are just suggestions. Yeah. If you want paranoid Linux, tails. Okay, so attack surface. So you can take a computer system and you can segment everything into consistent independent subsystems. We have disk, we have NVMe, which you could consider a different subsystem if you want. You have backup media, you have backup materials, you have your network, you have your memory, you have your applications, your configuration. So you can segment all those things up. And each of those systems will have its own set of risks. And you should consider that when you're likely to start creating policies around them and how you want to protect that data. And remember this, a smaller attack surface is easier to defend than a big one. So for example, if I have a router at the network and I allow everything in to my network, everything in, then every server on it has to be protected. That's a large attack surface. But if I were to put a firewall that was a network firewall at the junction between the ISP and my network, I only have to worry about that one to protect my internal systems. That's a smaller attack surface. So yeah, that's what we mean by that. So, and another one would be if you have sensitive network services. Those might be things like SSHD. It might be that your VPN. It could be maybe you have remote access to be able to see a GUI on your machines. Could be SyncThing. Could be any number of utilities that are sensitive network services. Those should be concentrated on as small a number of machines as possible. The more machines you have, again, the larger the attack surface is going to be. If there was, let's say there was an exploit in SSHD, let me give you an example. So let's say that I put a version of SSHD that was, let's say it was FreeBSD based. That would be the one on the outside of the network. And let's say that I encrypted that and I only allowed people to come in that had maybe a smart card, or maybe they have something like the keys, like the YubiKey, or something like that before they're allowed access. That's an extra layer of security that your internal systems wouldn't have. That system on your internal systems, you could set up your firewalls to only allow SSH connections through the pfSense. So you have to go through the pfSense router to be able to get to any of the systems internally. Or you could turn off access from the pfSense router completely, so it cannot initiate SSHD connections at all. In that case, then you're completely separated as far as your network filter is concerned. You completely blocked off the ability for someone on the outside to use SSH to come all the way through into your network. So anyway, that's one area where you kind of reduce the attack surface. Now, those are suggestions. Those aren't recommendations, okay? It's easier to secure a checkpoint than it is a group of individual systems is the point. So, yeah. So you could think of it also as you have, maybe you have a broad brush limit on the services that are exposed that you protect from pfSense on the outside, but then each one of your individual systems may have a smaller subset of rules they have to protect against. So, yeah, and it is always advisable to run multiple firewalls, absolutely. Let's look at a couple of maybe some possible security measures. So let's say you have a server. Let's say you have a NAS server where you're storing movies and your music collection and your photos, and maybe you have some financial data on it too. So if those services are publicly available, in other words, you want to be able to access this while you're on the road, you need a secure network ports. You need to secure those to make sure that they're only allowed access to you, right? You don't want those open to anyone else. And so you might consider things like a VPN to be able to access them. You only enable those network services that you need. I mean, I know that that's a duh, but you'd be surprised how many times that even here in my lab, where after I've been working on a project, I come back and I forget to turn off a network service because it's no longer used. I mean, that happens. And if you're watching and you have monitors set up that remind you to say, "Hey, dummy, you left this network service running, turn it off," yeah, that helps. So yeah, we're only human, and there's only so much capacity our brains can hold and remember. So things like reminders that come back and say, "Hey, you've got network ports on here that shouldn't be on," it'll tell you to turn them off, and you'll know to go do that. Good reminders. Anyway, change your default passwords. I don't know how many times I've read in the past couple of years where an attacker has gained access to a commercial system simply because they left the default passwords in place. And IoT devices, that happens all the time. It happens all the time for a number of reasons, and the biggest reason when it happens is because the IoT devices don't document the ones that are open on it. Yeah, so you don't know and until somebody publishes a report that someone has gained access to an account you didn't know existed on that device. But so change the default passwords where you can. I don't like systems that install with default passwords. I prefer them to tell me to change the password when I'm installing it. I feel much better when that happens. I'm sure you do too. Use two-factor logins for the external access. If you're ultra paranoid, you can use it internally too. I mean, I'm old. Well, never mind. You've seen my diagrams on my network. They're out here. I've done presentations on it before. The other one is to install fail-to-ban. Fail-to-ban limits the brute force attempts that you can do. So let's say you have SSHD running. Well, I mean, I can guarantee you there are people that are out there looking for SSHD, and I see it on my firewalls all the time. See these guys just cruising by trying to find SSHD open. And one day, just for the heck of it, I said, I think I'll turn that port on and see what happens. And sure enough, that thing it backed up and it started hammering away at passwords. It started going through, it looked like a list. It just was continually hammering and hammering at it. Eventually, they may get lucky and get in. Fail-to-ban will only allow X number of attempts, and then it locks the entire machine down for a period of time. So it really spoils the number of attempts they can do in a given time frame. And a lot of times, these automated systems will just move on, and then they'll come back and they'll look at you again later. So yeah, the fail-to-ban does help. HTTP. If you do have an exposed web server, use HTTPS, because remember, that also protects your cookies while they're in transit as well. What about a laptop? So are you traveling with the laptop? Then its risk there is being stolen, and the data on it would of course be theirs. They would have everything that would be accessible to it unless you had full disk encryption turned on. The other one is there's risk of data being collected at Wi-Fi hotspots. I mean, we all know about the man-in-the-middle attacks. A lot of these Wi-Fi hotspots are insecure, and therefore your data is unencrypted. So the only way you can prevent that from being a problem is have a VPN that you turn on when you get to those sites. That does two things. That makes sure that even a man-in-the-middle attack can't jump in and become your hotspot, but you would still have to be careful of what you're doing, and when you're making your connections, making sure that you're on the right particular one. That's always kind of an issue, that you're on the one provided by the facility, the McDonald's or the Starbucks or whatever it is that you're using to connect to. Also remember that a firewall is needed to protect you out there as well. If you have services that are running on your laptop, you don't want those accessible from the outside ports. VPN access you would need as well, and that also might be to your home servers. So you might have a VPN that's encrypting your traffic going to your VPN provider, and you might also have a VPN that is being used to access your home servers. Possible security measures that you might consider on networks is to disable the services that aren't needed. If no firewall and network service is up, it's available to anyone. So that's the problem you have. I mean, in most of the cases, Linux is trusting. So yeah, if you got an SSHD system running with no firewall in front of it, it's available to everybody that's able to connect to your network and get to that address. And the other problem that you have with a lot of services, there's no authorization credentials. That's one of my biggest problems with some of the R applications, is that they do have some, but they're the .r files, and those might as well not even be there. So you want to turn those off or not allow them access through the firewall. Services also could be running as root, and if they're able to jump to a shell, they would have full administrative privileges on your box. Yeah, not good. Firewall. Filter and gateway types are one type, and those are firewalls installed on routers. That would be examples of that would be like pfSense or OpenSense, etc. And then you also have the NUT filter or the IP filter, which would be those that would be provided by Linux and would be installed on the individual machines. So yeah, you can use a combination of both. There's no problem with that. In fact, you can go as far as for each. You can get so paranoid with the filters that you can, in the to and the from column of where you want the IP addresses, you can say this machine is only allowed to connect the SSHD to that machine. And you can actually get that far. Now, of course, IP addresses can be spoofed. Right, they can be. But yeah, you can get that far down if you want. What about monitoring and logging your system? So one of the things that I use is LogCheck. And LogCheck can email you messages containing entries from your system logs that are unusual. So if it's, and you can control it. There's a broad-based control called paranoid and server and workstation that you can set. And you can also go in and set individual rules if you want to make it even more fine-grained. But I will tell you, if you set it to paranoid, it's going to get real chatty, and it's going to fill up your email box a lot with long messages. Yeah, it's very verbose. You probably want to reserve that for servers that have sensitive data on them, or maybe your firewall gateways. But I certainly wouldn't turn paranoid on every single one. You'd be flooded so much with junk, you might as well just go read the log files directly. It might be faster. Monitoring, HTOP, TOP, and glances are all good tools to monitor. Now, typically we think of, okay, let's just go and see how much memory the systems are taking and how busy they are, and maybe we look at what processes are running. Here, what you're really looking for is to gain kind of a historical memory of what those systems are doing most of the time. And what you're looking for is unusual CPU network activity, maybe disk activity, or in a higher volume than normal. That there's something else going on that you're like, wait a minute, I didn't install anything new on that machine. Why is it taking more resources today? And I mean significantly more resources, right? That you're looking for, not just a 5 or 10% increase in activity, but something really going on that you don't know what it is. And in that case, you might want to go investigate the logs, take a look at what has happened. What about detecting changes? So packages are some of the areas that we're always concerned about. Because even though there are, Debian and RPM and Redhat, they all have very good mechanisms. Arch has very good mechanisms for indicating that these are authentic. But what happens after they're installed? What prevents something from overlaying files that you had thought you had locked down and you knew what was in them, but something else that you didn't know about comes along and modifies something outside of its scope? That's always a possibility. So you have Debian systems. You can use dpkg-verify, and it'll go through and it'll look for the packages you have installed and the files that have been installed, and it starts to look down through them to determine what's been modified in them. And it'll give you a list, and there's a coded list, and you can go look it up in the man page as to what that means. Some of the times it means that this was a legitimate change, this is an approved change, like an update has something, an update has come along and it's updated a config file. Or this is one that we're not sure where this update came from, and then you'll have to go back to, what did you do to the system, or whether or not something else modified it. Red Hat Systems has a similar method. It's called RPM-verify-A. You can do the -verify and do individual packages with RPM, or you can do -A, which does everything. And again, there's a set of codes that are in the man pages that you can look at for that. AID is also another good way of detecting changes. That is or tripwire, something like that. Those are methods that you can use to, it goes through and it creates a fingerprint for each of the files on your system. Now you can control what directories you want it to look at. I'm not going to make any suggestions specifically about which ones you should protect or not, but there is a configuration file that controls the areas of the system that you want AID to manage. If you have it manage everything on your system, that can take some time to run because it calculates a checksum on every single file in it. And then it publishes it in a database. and then it does it. The next time it runs, it does a comparison between the old database and the new. So every time you make every time you do an update, you have to copy the new database up to the old manually to do that. But it will then check to see whether or not there is a difference between the file it discovers on disk and the last time it calculated a checksum for it. There's another thing that it's kind of an interesting thing that if you're looking for a command, you're not sure what it is, you can use apropos. And apropos will take a keyword and it'll search your man pages, and it'll come back with a list of everything that matches. So let's say you were looking for a copy, and you type in apropos copy as the keyword. It'll come back with CP. It'll come back with, I think there's a bunch of others that it comes back with, like some of the utilities to do individual copies or bitwise copies and all that kind of stuff. But it'll show, it's a good way to search for man pages using keywords when you're not quite sure of what command to look for, but you have an idea of what you want it to do. You can just do the apropos, and that's on most of the systems that I've ever been around for Linux. So that's the end of part one. Where this goes from here, really up to you. So in the coming lessons, this is some of my thoughts, and I'd like to hear yours as well. How to configure a firewall, and whether that be on pfSense or whether that be at IP filters or net filters. Certainly wanting to teach you how to do that. Turn on other detection features. There are other things you can do in Linux, and Linus does help you. It will kind of coach you through and say you need to have this on and this on and this on. So we'll go through some of that. Package and package cache management. It's always a good idea to keep that lean, mean, and clean, as we say. There are times where the package management system and its cache can become corrupt, or it can contain files that are not really there, or even worse, that are there but aren't properly checked in. That happens sometimes during failed updates, or in partial uninstalls. And so you may find versions of packages that are different than the ones that are installed in the cache. That is a common problem. So we'll talk about how to clean that mess up. Handling problems after an upgrade. Yes, upgrades can reverse system hardening decisions that were made. Absolutely, they can. How to detect new ARP members coming into your network. And that would be MAC addresses that show up that aren't part of your network, and you're going, wait, I didn't put any new machines on. How did that get in here? Audit your system for specific changes that would compromise security. Now, that might be your password file, it might be your shadow file, it might be your group file, it might be some obvious places to look. There might be others. Where should your default UMask be set? What's a recommended setting? Password expiration the Linux way. So yeah, we probably should talk about that a little bit and get your systems so that they actually are expiring your passwords, because you don't want to keep the same password for very long. And just in case you happen to be using and never use the same password on more than one system. How to back up and test your backup. And there's an exception to that. If you're using LDAPs, you can do that because that's what LDAPs does. How to back up and test your backups. We'll talk about that. That should be part of any security discussion. Making your distro run off a USB key. Well, why would you do that? So you can take it with you anywhere, but how to take it securely with you anywhere. What to do if you have to nuke and pave after a compromise. Yeah, we hope never that happens, but if it does happen and you suspect you've been compromised, you don't know what they've done. And if you're not tracking what's changed in your system, you'll never find out. And chances are they'll cover their tracks anyway. So yeah, they're pretty savvy. If somebody gets in that is savvy, that really knows what the heck's going on, they will cover their tracks. So it can be very hard to detect. And I know that some of these systems have gone undetected for many months before they finally find out that they really had been compromised. So yeah, it's really up to you where we go from here. So that. Let me get my mouse back. Yeah, that's kind of where I wanted to stop today. This is a big lesson. This is not something I can cover in 30 minutes. It's not something I can cover in an hour. It's probably not something I can cover really in a lifetime, but we can attempt to go down through some of the basics. I can get you started. I can give you some places to go to get some more information that's better than I can give you. I don't mind admitting that I don't know everything. I certainly don't. So I'm learning too, and still learning, and probably will continue to do so. I hope to see you all again real soon. Hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, as always, please like and subscribe. Hope to see you all again real soon. Bye for now.